In today's episode,
created the bomb of the century.
A look behind the scenes.
That's a very useful feature.
Of the network operations.
Well, long story short, they come in the morning to find me sleeping.
Of Cisco Live.
I think that's telling. I mean, if people will listen to us, you know who you are out there, and add V6 addresses, you've got clients willing to connect to you.
Welcome to Cisco Tech Stories. A podcast with real-life stories from real-life engineers. Your hosts are Nicholas and Tristan.
Hello and welcome to this special Cisco Live episode of the Cisco Tech Stories podcast. I recorded this episode in Amsterdam with a few members of the NOC team. The NOC team, which I also happen to be a part of, arrives on site less than a week before the event and deploys hundreds of switches and access points in a matter of days. Takes over a part of the venue network and puts in place the latest security and networking technologies in order to showcase some of our latest stuff, while also requiring a very strict stability on the event network. In this episode, we have Elena Berkey-Sanz, a sales solution architect from Spain, who's responsible for a lot of the organization of the NOC team, as well as managing the deployment team. All our engineers running around and plugging things in the right place in the right manner. We also have Joe Clark from the US, distinguished engineer, who's one of our server guys, DHCP, syslog, authentication, AI, you name it. We have Andrew Yurchenko, principal engineer in Belgium, who works on the VPP data plane protocol during the day throughout the year, but is our automation and tooling guy here at Cisco Live. And last but not least, James Botting, a consultant from Pylon One, who specialized in large events network all year long, and is our resident BGP, NAT, and overall connectivity guy, as well as various other responsibilities. Enough said, here's the episode for you to enjoy. Hello, guys. So we have a bunch of the NOC crew here. I will start with Joe and Andrew, the oldest members in the current team, because we don't have Remco. So Remco is the NOC lead, right? I was going to ask him to do the introduction. So can you guys start about how this team is formed? How does Remco pick the members and how you started?
Oh, okay. So how does he pick the members? I don't specifically know how he chooses some of the members. I think some of them are self-selected from, or their management selects them. I know back when I started, Andrew tells me it's 2011, I had already been involved in the US in doing this. And the way I got involved there was I stumbled into a room one day and they were setting up networking and I said, hey, can I help? I do the Cisco Works stuff. I'm like, ooh, cool. Maybe you can help fix this issue. And so I was doing that since 2005. And then I finally got permission to go over to London to do it. And I was doing the same thing, kind of Cisco Works, prime infrastructure. And I guess I didn't do a terrible job, so they kept bringing me back.
With me, it started with Remco would have the firewall in the network. And at that time, I was doing PIX firewall in the back. And every time they had some quirk in the PIX firewall that they needed help with, and that's how we knew each other. And I started, then I moved to doing IPv6, and that was my job, to run after people and tell them, hey, can you configure IPv6, please?
And you're still doing that today?
Oh, no, I'm not doing that today anymore. Now it's IPv6 is part of the setup of the network, so it kind of works by itself. I don't have to chase anybody. So now I'm doing automation.
Okay, we're going to get back to all of that. Elena, can you tell us about the deployment?
Yeah, so I guess it comes a little bit back to the first question that you guys have just posed. So the deployment, we pick the team. Some of the people in the team are sort of early in career, starting off at Cisco. And so we just give them a chance to experience what a networking event is like. That's how I started personally. I came in through my manager at CSAP, chose me for that. I had no hands-on experience at all. I was like 21, 22 at the time, completely new for me. So it's a very good experience to just see what it is like and see if that's something that you might like, that you might want to get into in the future as well. So that's mostly the deployment team and how it's set up. And a lot of it is just, pretty basic stuff in comparison to what the guys in the core team do. It's just kind of laying down the foundations of how to actually deploy all of the kit that we do. Obviously, there's part of the event that we take over from the actual infrastructure from the venue. We just half of it we take over control of, and then the other half we deploy on top of it just to cover all the gaps that we might think benefit for the event and each venue that we're in. And it's a pretty fun and very manual labor sort of part of the event. Everyone's just running around plugging in switches and APs on poles.
How many people do we have running around and plugging stuff?
It changes every year, obviously, but mostly around 20, maybe 25 people, split between the wired and the wireless team. Although they all sort of help between one another whenever we need to.
So an obvious question is, we're reusing some of the venue infrastructure and we're also adding our stuff. What is the ratio between the two?
Well, I think it's more or less 50%-ish.
No,
A
we
little bit more.
stole, 530 APs this year, and we overlaid 120 on top.
Oh, okay.
But
Got one.
all the switches are ours in the comms cupboard.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like I think from the days in Berlin where most of it was overlay, at least in this venue, most of it is installed and then just taken over.
Installed me was already here.
Yeah.
So we do have to provide some switch ports for some labs, some exhibitors, right? And then we add access points where coverage is needed because the event has a special layout and we want extra coverage, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it basically depends on, obviously, also marketing and, the actual building of the layout of the event. It doesn't change too much, especially in the same venue from year to year, but, there's some things also depending on how many partners we have, how many Cisco booths, etc. The physical layout of the event changes, and hence that makes that the requirements for our equipment also changes.
And it seems super complicated to manage because you have 20 people running around plugging switches and a lot of stuff, and then you need to get all of them back. So, I mean, where do they come from? Where are they shipped from? How do you make sure you have them all back? How do you organize a group of 20 people?
So, do you mean the actual equipment and how we do it, or how the physical people are separated? Okay, so I guess part of it comes from the staging trip that we call to kind of prep the equipment and provision the equipment and sort of organize it between different halls and just pack them in the right flight cases so that it's then easier to, once we're on site, sort of a plug and play kind of situation. So it makes it easier for, especially the new early in career people that it might be the first year that you're joining us. They might not really know, like I said before, no one has ever touched a switch before or even know what a switch is or what it looks like and where to plug things. We've had a lot of situations where fiber ports, copper ports are sometimes mistaken. So it starts at a very basic level. And so the easier we can make it for the deployment team, the couple of weeks that we're here in December as well, just prepping everything, it just makes the organization better. So we just organize a team, like I said, in two. We separated them in between the guys that look after the wired, so the switching, and the guys that look after the wireless. So we split them in teams. We kind of do a little bit of an intro of this is what it's like. This is how we like it to run. How we basic explanations as to how to plug a switch in, what to do, where you put a double power, where you don't, where you have to take care of other things, and then we use Andrew's tool to kind of help them visually see how the holes are distributed and where we've decided to place a switch, and hence where the rest of the companies that help us with the cabling for the network drops, where they should be able to find a network drop with the correct label for our number of the switch, basically.
Yeah, that's all based on your work with the PDF editing, though, back in the day. So Helene and Dave were taking the PDF file that we received from the venue, and on that PDF, they would place the switches where they would be. And then, of course, the circumstances changed throughout the event. So I still remember the times when you would be printing new version because you edited, you added some switches, you removed some switches, and then trying to hunt down all the copies, because obviously the previous printed copies were there, and that was interesting.
And of course, random people have an old version of the printout.
Talking about labels, that was the interesting story, because back in the day, it was before I inherited the automation. The labels were printed very big font, but just the label. And I think it was in London, maybe first time in London when it was that. Well, it's a lot of labels already, right? So then somebody printed 2 copies of the label with the same number, and it was not the same person. And at that time, the the notes were done on paper, and it was also 2 different people. So we had 2 different logbooks with the positioning of the switches, where the switch is, and they put the label with the same number on 2 different switches in the totally different sides of the building.
That's redundancy for you.
Yeah, that's redundancy. And you can imagine that was pretty interesting when they were receiving calls, because at that point, the staging was mostly copy pasting almost exactly the same configuration.
James is dying.
So at that time, the pre-staging was mostly copy pasting the same configuration on the ports, and then the changes were done by person sitting with the terminal and logging into the devices and doing the changes live and copy pasting the configuration on the ports. So they would receive a call, and it would be 2 people. So they had 2 radios. They would receive a call. Hey, can you change the port on that switch? And they look up the switch in their paper records. They change the port. Well, they changed the port not on the switch that they were supposed to change the port. Then the other person receives a call. Hey, they just let us know that their service went down. Can you change the port? That port. So this time they changed the port on the second switch. So they bring down another service. And that was pretty unfortunate, because it took a few hops in this loop to figure out, oh, well, actually you deployed the same switch, but it's in different sides of the building. So that was the first part. When I inherited the setup, the first thing I did is making sure that labeling was tied to the MAC address of the switch. And the MAC address is also printed on the label itself, because it's really handy, because even this up to this time we had this year we had a story where we bought new 400 switches, and during the labeling process, during staging, actually 2 labels were swapped. So the deployment team, even with all the automation we have now, they deploy the switch and they come back to Elena and then they say, hey, you know what strange things?
I can't find the switch.
Yeah, I remember, right? They said, I cannot find the switch. I brought it in. I put it at this desk.
Yeah.
It doesn't come up. I see the light. It's connected somewhere, but it doesn't come up on the tooling. But strangely, and completely another switch comes up in a different portion of the map. I was like, oh, okay, well, let's go and check. And indeed, the 2 labels were swapped. Luckily, this time it was not in different parts of the building. It was just neighboring tables. So we fixed that pretty quickly. So that was.
But at least you know where the other label is, because it places it somewhere else on the map, right?
Well, no, that said, with the access points, we actually had a trio which swapped the labels between the 3 access points.
To make it more fun. But you're jumping a little bit, because you were talking about paper first handling, and obviously now we have automated all of that, but then you're talking about placement on the map. So you have a map system.
Yes. Well, so that's I guess we need to kind of go back into the history of the tooling. It all started with back when Cisco Live had been completely flat network. And that was long time ago. So it was just a bunch of VLANs, bunch of switches with trunks. So it was giant, well, not giant, but pretty sizable layer 2 network. And it was just the number of VLAN that was kind of the service number. And the switches had all identical configuration. The only thing different was the IP address to manage them. And somebody was like, you know what, it's really boring to manually make this configuration. So let's create some software that will generate it. And kind of it went all from there, adding every year more and more details. Then my predecessor, Mark McKillop, so he decided that, well, actually copy pasting is also quite boring. So he tried the feature called Smart Install, and some of the elements didn't quite go well because of the way the switch interacted with the configuration. So then he started to code thing, and he named it Smarter Install. And that's when I inherited the tooling. So it was, and also there was a part of the tooling to change the port configuration. So that's kind of the state that we had it. When was that? In Berlin, I think. And yeah, and then it was evolving every year with we free up some time by automating some part of the tasks, and then we're looking at what we can automate further. And maps were one of the things that appeared. Maybe it was in Barcelona shortly, because then we changed venue, and then I dropped the maps because I had to do a lot of other things. Because we added wireless, so when we moved to Amsterdam, we added wireless because the team lead has changed, and kind of we decided that having very separate teams was kind of not the greatest idea. And now it's all from the inventory standpoint, from the tracking standpoint, it's all the same system.
So maybe, Elena, can you take us through what one of the CSAP, the sales associate that we have, has to do to go install a switch? Because there's some scanning, so we are tracking everything, where everything goes, right?
Yeah. So based on what Andrew said about the barcode and the label of the switch, so there's, if you physically see it, it has two barcodes, and in the middle you just have a label with text with then just our convention with numbers from all the switches that we've ever deployed. So we essentially have a check-in station that we call it. It's just a scanner like you would see in any supermarket, a barcode scanner that you just essentially we've created a system where everyone has based on their Cisco username, you get your own barcode for the user itself, and then because the switches themselves also have the barcode, you basically check yourself out, let's say, as within your user, and then you check out the devices or device that you're going to be intending to go out and deploy, and that kind of changes the status on Andrew's system to say check out, and so we know that it's outside of the NOC physically, and then basically if either at the tear down moment where we're closing up shop, or if for whatever reason we send someone out from the deployment team to try and install a switch, and may it be, the network drop might be damaged, so we can't plug it until they fix that, or the power guys haven't gone through that area yet, and hence we wouldn't be able to power up the switch and be able to ping it and know where it is and know that it's online, or if it has any issues, then we ask the deployment team to run back to the NOC with the switch that they intended to deploy, and basically do the opposite sort of system and just check it into the NOC, so that we can track at least whether it's inside or outside, and so that if anyone says, oh, where's this kind of switch, then it's very easy to track and at least know if it's inside or outside.
Yeah, you've done a good job with that. It's not just as simple as a supermarket. They've got hazard tape down on the floor that spells out, have you checked this, checked in? Question, or checked out. They make sure that you make sure that everyone knows, because to your point earlier, that you want to make sure everyone's trained and knows what to do. And the other thing I noticed the other day, speaking of maps too, you now have a legend printed in front of the check-in station with all the icons that the people will see on the map. That was helpful for me because I didn't know what all those icons meant. Like, that's a useful thing to do. Even I could go deploy a switch.
Yeah, of course. That's the point, right? And I mean, every year I go to Andrew and I'm like, what is the circle with the orange on the inside and the white on the outside?
Well, this year we actually have doubled the size of the tooling team, because we had a person joining last year, Ivan Ivanov, and they did something interesting. They actually did a little bit pen testing on the tool, and then they found some part where I forgot to put in the permissions check. So they were like, okay, let's you come and you fix it. And he came and he helped a lot with maps. And unlike me, he actually can make user interface friendly. So when you see the
Your webpage sucks. Sorry to say, it's horrible. It works, but it's horrible.
It's now prettier than it used to be. And I guess another good part of the system that makes it so much easier for the deployment team, especially anyone that's never done anything like this before, is within the tool there's a ticketing system where we log incidents, and that's part of the different colors on the bubbles that you can see on the map. So if, like I said before, if someone's intending to go deploy a switch, they are checking it out and they encounter, let's say that the power guys haven't gone through that area yet, and so we can't plug it in. there's a lot of switches out there to deploy, especially the first few days. And so I'm the center of control. Let's say I sit at the desk in the NOC, and basically all these 25 people come and report issues, or tell me how things are going, how things are looking, so that I don't have to physically walk around the whole venue, right? So the ticketing system is really useful for the team, because they just basically go onto the logs for that, and within that exact switch, they tell me, there's no power here, and so that I know, and then obviously it's date stamped and time stamped. That's a very useful feature. Because it has the date and it has the exact. Actually, this is a feature request I've put in for next year, because it is so precise that it has the hours, the minutes, the seconds, and the decimals of the seconds.
Well, it actually has down to nanoseconds. You guys are so fast sometimes that.
And so I've put in a feature request for next year to kind of edit the format so that I just see, the hour and the minute, because it doesn't need to be that precise. Just it gives me an idea of more or less, when was the last time that I sent someone to this area? When was the last time that we checked whether all the other teams that we depend on, and so that whether it's reasonable to send someone else to go and check again or not. Because end of the day, these venues are very, very big, and believe it or not, it takes a lot of walks and a lot of time to go around the whole thing. So especially the further holes. So it's very useful.
And it's also, we try to make it useful for Remco as well, because all of these critical updates and events, if something becomes unreachable, if the switch goes down, loses power or connection, that also goes into a WebEx chat. Where leads, Remco, or whoever else can join from the team. So it's open to anyone from the team. They can kind of monitor and keep an eye on what is going on in the network without having to look at the dashboard or any screens.
We do quite like your tickets. We had some fun reading Elena's tickets.
Oh, yes.
Switch on life support. Sending cable retermination.
There was one this year where it would just keep dying. Just some parts of the venue are a little bit outdated when it comes to the internal infrastructure. And so sometimes it doesn't matter how many times we went to check, it didn't matter how many times we repatched it. It was sometimes challenging. And so I used to put in, like patience dying.
Patience critical. Cable cannot be recovered.
Obviously, we try to have fun as well, and like Andrew said, right, it's available to anyone, and we've made it as user friendly as possible, and as you don't have to be a rocket scientist or a CCIE to understand what we're doing, and that's the intention.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of WebEx and fun, Joe made a really cool addition this year to our collection of fun tools.
So automation just isn't for the wired side of things. With the data center, we use quite a bit of automation too, which freed up time to play with some other things. And last year, maybe, Remco got budget for the core and wireless part of the network. So new switches were bought, we always get new APs. It seems like there's always a new Wi-Fi standard. But this year, we said, the data center needs help, please, sir. May we have some money? And he said, okay, what do you need? And my two teammates, Yara and Anthony, they went and created the bomb of the century, the bill of materials for the. They got everything. And by everything, I mean everything. New 400 gig switches. We're not doing 400 gig yet. And a new UCSX direct system with 6 blades each. So 2 of these, one for each site. Why build one when you can build 2 for twice the cost? And 8 NVIDIA L40S GPUs. And certainly all of that would get denied. And we knew we'd negotiate. Okay, fine, we don't need the GPUs. Oh, great, okay, you can have it. No, they said yes to everything. And so now we have to do something with this, right? So because we had some time, I had this bot that I created a while back, a WebEx bot, that people could ask it questions about a MAC address or IP address, like, where is this or who is this? And I had this spaghetti mess of regular expression code on the receiving end to try and pull out MAC addresses and IP addresses, then go look that up in Prime Infrastructure or Cisco Prime Network Registrar. And with AI, I said, why am I parsing? Like, why am I being a loser and parsing text with regular expressions? What is this, the 90s? So I said, let's see what these GPUs can do. Andrew gave me the suggestion, hey, try out Olama. It seems fairly simple. I said, okay, I did. It was very simple. I brought down the Llama 3.3, the 70 billion parameter model to kind of back it. And I said, okay, here is the question the user has. Here's the system prompt. Like, here's who you are. Here are the tools you have. Here are the functions you can call. Wow me. And it worked. The bot could figure out, the LLM could figure out this is an IP address that the user's asking about. This is an IP. Sorry, this is a MAC address, this is a username. This is fantastic. I don't have to parse any of this. But the fun part, and when I unleashed this on the team, they tried to beat it to death at dinner one night. The fun part was, yes, it would give you good information from these tools, but the thing you could tell it to do was give it back to you in fun and interesting ways. I think Andrew first did it, give it back as a haiku, and it did. Like, okay, now I know we're going to have some good fun with this. The best, though, I've seen is giving it back as a pirate. Give me everything, all the details about so-and-so, and speak like a pirate. And he's like, Yar, you be Joe. I'm like, okay, this bot is fun. So it's given us some creative ideas for next year, but that was useful because ultimately the bot is fun aside, it is useful for self-service. We also use it so anyone on the team can ask for DHCP reservations, and it works for that too. But the fun, the pirate speak, the poetic output, that was
Every time I go to that chat,
bonus.
there's a new dad joke that's coming from.
You can ask it, yeah, give me the info and tell me a dad joke too.
You can ask gangster rap as well.
The gangster. It was a little softcore for what I would consider gangster rap, but it did its best.
It's not going to beat Eminem yet.
Yeah, no, he's not going to spit that kind of fire, but maybe one day.
So I think it's important. People ask, why automation? Often, we say automation is for repetitive tasks, and you could wonder, we don't have so many repetitive tasks because we only set up the network for 1 week. But on the other hand, we use automation for two things. First, to eliminate human mistakes. That's what Elena, you said, right? Because it's a very cumbersome process and there can be a lot of mistakes if you do it, especially pen and paper and so on. It's also why we do use the Cisco tools like Catalyst Center and so on. That's the base of our network management. But those are not made for setting up a network with 400 switches in 4 days, checking them in, checking them out, identifying who placed which switch. That's not part of the product. So that's why we add our layer of automation on it. And then, Joe, you kind of said it, right? So we do have a lot of tools, but then if you ask any person from the NOC help desk, hey, you need to help our customers here, they cannot connect, they don't necessarily know, they don't have the access, we don't want to give access to everyone, but they're not a specialist in access registrar, a specialist in Cisco ICE, in the wireless controller to go find all the information. It's much easier to ask a WebEx bot, and then you get everything in one go, right? So that's
the one of the key points. We are a trust but verify group. I mean, if you have a need to get access, it's not too hard to do it. But just because you have access doesn't mean you're going to be proficient in whatever you're giving access to. So exactly why we want those kind of helpful self-service things.
And plus, if you can't find the information you need, you can get a dad joke instead. So I just pulled up one of the messages to Joe's bot. And Luke asked for information about a specific address. And it goes, hello, Luke. I wasn't able to find any information about the address you provided. So here's a dad joke for you instead. Why did the network cable go to therapy? Because it had a lot of connection issues.
See? Value.
it makes your day better, yeah.
It's actually interesting that you say that because as every year we do the NOC tours where we give the chance to some customers or anyone internal that really has an interest in visiting the backstage part of the NOC. And one of the questions I always get when I bring my customers in is, why don't you use the Cisco tool and why do you use this bespoke tool? And it's actually part of what you just explained there, Nico. Of we do use the Cisco tools. They all feed from the background.
Yeah, and we make them interact as well, because last year was the first year that we fully used the DNA center to manage the switches, to monitor the switches and provide the assurance, besides doing the wireless deployment. And likewise with the maps, we get the information from the DNA center about all the wireless installations. So this way, what I was telling during the visits is that everybody has their own single pane of glass, but it's tailored to their specific role. So the deployment team doesn't quite need, especially when they're dealing with the switching part. They don't quite need to know the exact angle of the antenna. Like, maybe nice to know the type of the antenna if they're curious, but they certainly are interested where the things are and where they're mounted and how high they're mounted. And that's the information that we get from the DNA center, from the Catalyst Center, in near real time. And in return, we provide information about the switching infrastructure, so the Catalyst Center can provide the assurance on the network monitoring side, so the people who are in front of that screen, they can get more insight into the switching part. So it's kind of everything is connected to everything, and we tend to just make sure that the tools that we have more than one tool as well. So we have kind of, everybody likes building tools, using different tools. And it also creates kind of healthy competition sort of sense. Then everybody wants to improve their tools so they're the best.
It's hard, right? Because events as a whole is such a strange industry.
Yeah.
It's like nothing's wired to deal with building and removing an entire event in 2 weeks. Like everything's set up for structured cabling, but we don't have that. We have floors that go down, and then you need to get cables into holes in the ground that are now covered by wood because there's a stand on top of it. The tools are designed to support us to be able to deliver the event in the time frame that we have. And that isn't an off-the-shelf product that you can just go and get. If we could only use the tools that Cisco make and sell, we wouldn't be able to deliver the event in the time frame that we do with the people that we have. And while we're using those sources in the background, it doesn't necessarily mean that the front end that we're using to actually deliver it is a Cisco product.
Yeah, that brings me also to remember the design decisions that we make to make the whole deployment smoother. So remember, I don't remember which venue that was, but we got the cabling plan, and then when we started connecting devices, then about a quarter or so of the cables were going into different other places. And and that's kind of, if you have the fixed addressing, then you are stuck with then frantically getting into the switches, configuring, reconfiguring addresses, and then you still don't know where the cable goes. So that's why we made changes to our design that all of the addressing on the switches is DHCP. And that's very handy because then Joe wrote the scripts to pull all of the addresses and push them in real time into DNS. So nobody who needs to log into the device has to remember any IP address. And that's also what makes it kind of unique, because I think most of the network management tooling assumes the one-to-one correlation between IP address and the device. So Ansible, like a lot of even open source tools, they have this very hard-coded definition. Whereas if you have all the addresses DHCP, really the address is just ephemeral identity. And in our tooling, the first thing the tooling performs, it does show version to verify that the serial number that is there is actually serial number it is thinking to it's connected.
Serial number should be the unique identifier.
Yes.
But then you have controllers in high availability, and then the serial number can change.
That's the question for the next year, hopefully.
But sorry, go ahead, James.
I was just going to say, it's like, it's even more like fundamental fun tasks. Like, so you've got all these switches, we need to monitor them, right? So if you take a normal monitoring product, we build all this network in December and stage it all, and then we take all that, put it all in boxes, we turn up on site, and with a normal monitoring product, it's going to be like, your entire network's offline. You've got 550 switches that are offline, panic. And then how do you manage the one that should be on? Like the crew registration, which is the first thing that goes live here. That's done and online before anybody turns up. And it's probably, for those few days, one of the most important things in the network. But at that point, we don't have anything else deployed. So the monitoring tools that Andrew and Joe have worked together to build are based off of the checkout system. So when a switch is checked out, now we're monitoring it. And that's how we know when switches should be online. And if one goes and gets unplugged, they then know that that switch is out of the NOC and is now not online. So either it's coming back to us or something's gone wrong.
We have, it's an important point, sources of truth is critical. And I want to echo the dynamic nature of events. I do some other things, and James, I know you do too. It's such a unique thing. And where we have more static stuff like the data center, we can use more off the shelf. Like I use NSO for my automation engine because we're not pulling data center stuff out and in all the time. But it's really cool to have a central source of truth for the dynamic part of the network. And the tool, as we call it, is a great option for this because Andrew's kind enough to put a REST API on top of it. So I know what devices are there, and I can sync that source of truth with NetBox, which we also use for IPAM, and then I can use that to populate some of the network management tools. So it as long as you tie some of this together and everyone's communicating and everyone's operating off the same playbook, it really becomes a very efficient operation. And you can make it work because now everything is programmable. There's all these APIs. You can connect these things together so well that you can make a really robust solution, even for networks that are crazy dynamic, like any of these events, especially something with 21,000 people.
And we also get a lot of requests on site, right? And ad hoc things that we didn't plan for. And so having all of this system in place kind of really, really helps for
Yeah, I
those kind
remember
of projects.
last year we had decided that the 9300s that we were about to deploy in the world of solutions, so we initially provisioned them as layer 2, and then we were thinking, well, why are we provisioning them as layer 2? We'd better change them to layer 3 because then the segmentation would be much better. And then 3 hours before deployment, we did reprovision them, and it took about 40 minutes to do all the 17 switches.
You mean in contrast to this year where we went the other way around? Too many layer 3 switches
Oh,
and
yes.
had to roll some back. In exactly
But
the same time.
this year we did an interesting capacity testing, right? So that's you might tell a little bit about that because that was your idea.
So we this year decided that we were going to remove a variable that fluctuates in the network. So Joe has, again, these scripts that monitor the number of routes and the routes themselves in the route tables on our switches. And normally, when a customer is plugging and unplugging devices in that switch, if nothing else is plugged into that VLAN, that SVI goes down. When it goes down, it removes the route from the route table, which then triggers Joe's alerting. We get a route diff saying, oh, we've lost this route. So we go this year, we're going to mark all of our SVIs as no auto state. So they always stay up. And now we're only going to get an alert if a whole switch goes down. And if it's an IDF, we care about that. Also, it removes a variable. And that variable being, what if we run out of route space on the switch mid-show? Someone plugs something in and we go that one extra.
Why would you have so many routes?
Well, again, the dynamic nature of the network. So we have lots of VLANs to do segregation between services because we're providing those services to different customers on site. So it's not just our services that are running across the network. It's also things like the breakout solutions, AV stuff, anything that we can help make the event successful will pass over our network to a degree. And then there's all these VLANs for separation. And then there's all these routed points in the network to create further segmentation. And at that point, we've now got 5,000 routes in the table because each switch is contributing 200, 300. And more switches that you add, the more routes we get, especially dual stack. And yeah, we ran over that limit this year on the Catalyst 9K, the 9300, not the 9300X, the 9300. And Martin sat in the corner and he goes, oh, interesting. What's wrong, Martin? 100%. 100% what, Martin? Routes. I thought we did the maths on that, Martin. I thought we did the maths on that too. Apparently, we can't count.
Oh, that's why we have automation. That's why, coming back to the labels, that's why I did the machine readable labeling, because first time when I was taking over the fleet, we had few hundred of compact switches, so 560 CX, and they were stacked across the wall of the room, and I still have kind of nightmarish view of that, of the entire wall being filled with switches. And it's kind of like, I think you were already there, and then I need to count and inventorize and verify that the data in the database is correct. And then I'm like, okay, well, let's start counting. And it was, I think, 7 p.m. or so. And I start counting and I count and I re-verify. So then MAC addresses on 400 or 500 switches. Okay, it's about 9 p.m. I'm done counting. I put them down, and I'm a little bit of a well, I worked in TAC for 10 years, so I kind of don't trust myself very often. So I decide to recount. And I recount and I get a different number. So I decide to recount again. It's already nearing midnight. I finish recounting at about 1 and I get a third number. And that's when I realized that I need automating this. And yes, so long story short, they come in the morning to find me sleeping there with a lot of labels printed and attached to the switches, and the count being the fourth number. But this time it was done automatically. So
Can you give some numbers about the network? Like, what internet bandwidth do we have? What do we use out of it?
We take two 10 gig pipes from the RAI, so they've got dark fiber that goes back to two internet exchanges. In theory, it's 10 gig. I don't even think the RAI have pushed that here. We have done about 4.5, I think is the highest number I've seen on our dashboards.
I pushed 4.5 from one PC to the other.
For a sample rate, which is the way I'm doing it is a minute with SNMP.
No, I actually had the number of the speed test.
No, I meant on our dashboard.
yeah.
Yeah, that's 4.5 is what we measured.
Someone decided to deliver a 5 gigabit M-gig Ethernet adapter to the NOC, and Andrew has decided to test it in full.
To double the total venue traffic.
But yeah, so yeah, 4.5 gig. I think we're up to 60 terabytes of data now, if
We're
not
at
more.
70.
70. What was our record from last year?
Last year, same math, so same time it started was 64. I was working on the slides for this earlier for tomorrow's session. 56.93 last year, and we're already up to, it's only the day before the last day, 78.64.
That must be the IPv6 headers.
Maybe.
We're very happy this year because we have broken the threshold for IPv6 over IPv4. So native IPv6, 50-odd%. How much?
50.6 currently,
50.6.
but 74% of the internal traffic is V6. So that's pretty cool. We have more IPv6 clients than and there's plenty of services still that aren't IPv6 enabled. And if they were, we could probably add another 10 or 12 terabytes of traffic that's just pure V6 out of our network. So I think that's telling. I mean, if people will listen to us, you know who you are out there, and add V6 addresses, you've got clients willing to connect to you.
Yeah, but then we'll lose our favorite site for testing whether or not CLAT's working.
It's true.
GitHub?
Yeah, but that's probably worth dwelling on a little bit because this year it was one of the additions that was kind of interesting and intriguing for us and hopefully for the attendees as well, right?
NAT64.
Yeah, well, NAT64 and people getting the same IPv4 address.
Ah, yes. Many questions on the NOC booth this year about what is 120.0.0.2 and why is it flashed.
Right. So we've had IPv6 for a lot of years, right? We've went dual stack on the main SSID. We've tried a separate IPv6 SSID, a NAT64 separate SSID, but it was never really successful, right? Because if you make it separate, people won't really connect to it. And then if your laptop is dual stack, it's still going to do a lot of IPv4, even if it could do some IPv6. So what's up with this year, Andrew?
This year, actually, it was, well, people in this room. So James and Joe, they were pretty enthusiastic because me as a recovering IPv6 addict, I'm kind of like, well, look, it's just pipes. And then I made this video on YouTube, NATs are good. And I kind of, people still laugh at it 14 years later.
Hey, we still have NATs.
Which is, NATs are good.
It's a different type of
NATs are good. Yeah. So the technology is called IPv6 mostly, and it's a combination of various technologies, but primarily it's the way for a host to negotiate with the network, whether the host wants to use IPv4 legacy IP or not. And kind of cutting long story short, the host that supports this, so if you have a Mac on this network, if you have an iPhone, if you have Android, then the host understands that the network can provide IPv6 only operations. So that implies having DNS64 and NAT64. And it relinquishes its IPv4 address, then installs a little translator in the box and assigns the IPv4 address 192.0.0.2 to this translator. So then the applications that do the name lookups, they talk to DNS64, which creates synthetic IPv6 records for our favorite IPv4 only websites. Then the IPv6 prefix on this website steers the traffic towards our pair of NAT64 devices. And then there it gets translated back into IPv4 to exit our network. So, and that's where it was very cool this year, because you could do the counting in a different way, because NAT64 traffic is accounting as IPv4 on the outside, from the outside world, and as IPv6 from the inside world. And that's where it adds this 25% of difference, depending on which side you look at.
And the thing is, the previous years that we've done NAT64 demos, they always had a fatal flaw, and that's if you had something that had a hard-coded v4 address in it, it wouldn't work because there was no v4 stack. And this year, the only reason we've been able to make this work is the addition of v6 mostly option 108, because the only devices that are offering that functionality are the ones that are also supporting CLAT. And that CLAT 192.0.0.2 is the only reason that makes this work. If we didn't have it, we still wouldn't have been able to do it on main.
Yeah, and sometimes it works even too well. You remember when we were setting it up?
So I was setting it up and I was building the NAT64 translators, and we didn't have any of the DNS infrastructure in place. We didn't have option 108. So I just pointed, because we're using the well-known prefix, you can use public NAT64, DNS64 services. And those public DNS64 services just synthesize these Quad A records for you off the well-known prefix. So I just pointed my laptop at Google's DNS64 service. So it was the first one I found that was functioning at the time. And suddenly my laptop just went, okay, no problem. And I turned the v4 stack off on my laptop and then just out of reflex pinged 8888. And I wasn't even thinking about it. I'm like, oh, good, that works. And I've kind of looked away and I'm still reading some documentation. And then I suddenly looked back and gone, why did that work? And turns out there's multiple ways that CLAT can negotiate. I thought this was stuff that we needed on network with Prep64 in our router advertisements. And then, no, turns out you can do it from DNS as well. So laptop had figured it out and had just turned on this service in the background, and it was too efficient.
The good thing is that if a client connects and it has no idea about CLAT and all of that stuff, it's still going to put an IPv4 address and act.
Wonderful. That's exactly the idea, yeah.
All the Windows machines were doing dual stack like they did before.
And something else we changed on along those lines this year is we have a legacy SSID, so we can try all those stuff on the main SSID, and then if you have whatever problem, there's the legacy SSID. And we've seen less than 10% of the clients having to go to the legacy SSID, and we know people with hard-coded IPv4 VPN tunnels where some of them going there. So
yeah, the VPN problem is kind of a complicated one. I think me and Joe and Andrew have spent some time looking at it, and there's definitely a combination of like, there's two problems. There's one where you're overriding your DNS to a DNS that doesn't support DNS64, which causes some problems. And then there's another one to do with like metric preferences between the CLAT interface on your machine and the VPN interface. And it seems at times when you're trying to send v4 traffic through your VPN tunnel, CLAT is converting it for you and then sending it over the VPN tunnel as v6, which is not very helpful. So it's a shame that those situations we've needed to kind of resort back to legacy. There's been several people who had to tell them that they needed to go back to legacy for that. It'd be where we go with that to try and resolve that in the future, I think.
less than 10% is good to me.
Yeah, we went to this really worried that there was going to be a really large number of people on legacy, and I don't think that's happened.
That's a very good point, because I remember that. So those people who know about the event called FOSDEM, so I live in Brussels, and me and a few other folks from Brussels, we were helping the guys at FOSDEM to build their network. And me being IPv6 fan and involved into organization, I dropped the idea, hey, you know what, we're a technology event. Why don't we do NAT64 pure? And that was 2015, I think. So, and the event is free. It's a big crowd of open source people coming together to exchange information and talk. And the other organizers are like, great, fantastic, let's do that. Let's do NAT64 and DNS64 on the main SSID. So they do that. And I think we had 25% of the clients remaining on the main SSID, and the rest was switching to legacy. I think it was quite controversial at the time, but then that also helped to move the needle, I think, to some extent, because that number it was interesting to see that despite it was 25% is a tiny number, right? But compared to the SSID that we did for NAT 6.4, where there was 10, 15 people, that was very significant. And that's very interesting, the kind of power of defaults. If you want to make something happen, you have to make it default.
And as a vendor, we kind of have to push the needle a bit and try, because people keep saying, oh, watch out for these old clients. But if you don't test it, if you don't actually measure right now, most of the clients where they are, you just don't know, right? People talk about numbers they saw from 3 years ago, and it evolves, so it's not the same thing.
I had several conversations last year. Well, this year I haven't had that luckily, but people say, "Oh, I didn't know IPv6 is not yet there." Like, I don't know, and I was like, "Can you pull up your phone, please?" Then they pull up your phone, and then I get them to go to testipv6.com on their cellular. I was like, "Oh, what is this?" Okay, well, you have IPv6 on it, you don't know about it. So it's pretty transparent. I was very happy that Belgian operators also support IPv6 quite well. So then we had IPv6 only VPN that we brought up, so that we don't have to go through translators. Infrastructure.
I think a lot of the confidence of doing this experiment comes from knowing that some of the larger mobile operators have already been doing this for years.
Yeah. You want to know something embarrassing, though? One of the things that's forced on us, in every year previous, we've only allocated an IPv4 address to our devices for management from DNS purposes. So there was only an A record for every one of our devices. And we were discussing whether or not we wanted to do this IPv6 mostly on our management SSID. And we're like, if we do that, we're going to have to put another NAT 6.4 gateway in the network to handle our own management traffic. That's embarrassing. We should be ready to do IPv6 natively with all of our equipment. So that prompted me to generate quad A records, because the architecture of this network is pretty sexy in that the A and the quad A, or the IPv4 and the IPv6 addresses are easily guessable from one another. And so now we have that, but now we just have to convince everyone in the NOC to make sure they put proper IPv6 addresses on their stuff. And then we would be able to manage everything fully dual stack in here. And then maybe next year we could do IPv6 mostly on.
That's also, talking about embarrassing things. Then, as you did that, somebody comes to me and says, "Why does tool not respond on IPv6 on quad direct?" And I was like, "Well, let's fix that." And some more things obviously need to be fixed, because the mechanism that they use for bootstrapping the configuration and all that kind of need to research and see what will be the best mechanism.
Yeah, I mean, we've got other problems as well. It's like, so after we got to the end of December and Joe was doing his quad A record generation, he pings me and goes, "So all of the switches in the RAI, where we have them all installed already, and they go over a VPN tunnel back to the office, where we have the data center at that point. So we've still got the data center and racks in the Cisco office in Amsterdam from staging. We've got the switches that we leave in the RAI in their comms cupboards, and we've got a VPN tunnel between them." He's like, "I pulled these quad A records in, and now we can't access any of the switches." Mm-hmm. And I look into it, and I just haven't configured IPv6 over that tunnel at all. It's coming from the person who has been pushing the V6 on the network, and I just hadn't configured it. Sorry.
Okay, I don't want to take too much of your time, guys. We all have customers to meet and stuff to do. Any other blunder you want to share before we wrap up? Anything? We have a lot, apparently.
Yes, well, so that actually taught me quite a lot about how this team works and how Remco manages this team, because, so he couldn't join us today, but I'd like to give him a kind of tribute, sort of shout out. Because I was helping with the management of the network. Well, before we automated most of it, so it was manual access list management on the core switches. So on 2 pairs of core
mistakes
switches. Yes. Well, it's also, there is another thing that I was in TAC for 10 years, like I said, and I was, majority of them, I was in the PIX ASA escalation. And those of you who dealt with firewalls and those of you who dealt with iOS know that the access lists between them have a peculiar difference. So I'll pause for 5 seconds. So I'm sitting there with 2 terminals, connecting to them with about 5 people behind my back. I created the access list, and completely by motor memory, I wrote down the ASA way. Then, is it okay? Are you ready? Yes, we're ready. So we're kind of already pretty much after hours, but evening. All right. So I copy the access list and I do proton, paste it into 2 terminals, and I lose the access to both terminals. Because the ASA firewall access lists, they have net masks instead of wildcards.
Which, by the way, is the right way.
And I've just successfully cut off the access to the entire event. So, and then, luckily, Mirko Grabel, who was on the team, he already was having the console cable with him and is running out of the NOC to get to the cores. And then there was 2 cores and...
You could get in over V6, right?
And then I'm there in a complete shock, right? So then I'm like, well, are you going to invite me back? I said, of course, yes, because you won't do that again. And then, well, of course, and that was one of the reasons why we have all access list management pretty much automated.
And I guess for anyone out there listening, if this conversation has sparked an interest in you to join this team, if it sounds like what we do is something that would be up your alley, I guess feel free to ping me. And we always welcome new team members and new characteristics in people. So feel free to reach out.
Well, that's a good call out.
There you go. I'm in sales, end of the day.
That's a good sales pitch. I was going to tell an embarrassing story about myself, but that's a better.
You can also do that.
That's a better way to end it. Well, speaking of labels, this didn't happen this year. This happened back in Berlin. I just started kind of with the data center team, and we were partnered with NetApp, and we bring the data center to 2 of them, by the way, remember 2, into the venue. And I'm looking at this thing that we've unpacked and we've cabled up and it's sitting there. And we didn't label it. But when I powered it up and connected to it, the disk shelf that was in this unit was actually the disk shelf for the other data center. So somehow we had racked these things, because I didn't label it, somehow racked these things backwards. And I'm thinking, I just run like this. This what could possibly? It's replicated. It's this. Like no, we got to do it right. So we ended up, and I'm sure everyone out there knows how heavy disks are. You've probably carried like a PC. Most of the old PC case, that's all disk and power supply. Well, there were 20, 25 disks in this shelf. And we're carrying, and there's 4 shelves. So we're hauling this thing across the venue. And at the time, they had an agricultural convention in there. So they had these big conveyor, but they were selling. You were trying to sell this. They were trying to sell these big agricultural, like vegetable sorting machines. And we're walking, hi, yeah, don't mind us with these heavy, I don't know. I'm American, so I deal in pounds. Let me see if I can figure this out. They were probably like 50, 75 kilo disc shelves that we're lugging across about half a kilometer of Messe, Berlin. And just like Andrew, Remco's like, you won't do that again. Like, nope, I'm not going to do that again. And so every year since, we've labeled every aspect, every facet of the data center racks. This is DC1. So that's, I haven't made that. I've made other mistakes. But I haven't made that mistake yet.
So you're saying, as long as you learn from your mistakes, you can just make other mistakes, but not the same ones. Then you're a good engineer.
I've nuked Prime too in the past, and as long as I don't do that again, I think Remco will keep asking me back.
I talk about the one that I did then, or we're having a moment of sharing.
Sure, go ahead. We'll wrap up with that one.
So
it's a safe space.
Since I've somehow landed myself with the internet edge, there is a magic command in iOS called IP NAT Service Gatekeeper. This command is to do with how traffic that's not supposed to be natted is passed through a natted interface. And we were, I think it was the first year of Barcelona, and everyone was quietening down for the evening, and everyone was off eating ham on the show floor. And the session recording guys who had a public IP address started uploading lots of data. And when this command is missing, it causes the box to basically start melting, like a 100% routing performance, like the QFP. So we see this graph go, here we go. So everyone comes back and we're looking at it and we eventually work out what this command is and make a note for it the next year. Fast forward the year later, and we had a debate of, was it IPNAT service gatekeeper or no IPNAT service gatekeeper? No notes. We hadn't noted down what we did. We hadn't saved the config. So we took a 50-50 bet of the way around we thought it should have been. Q year 2 in Barcelona, and the same ham incident again, and the same period of time, and the box starts overloading, and at least I knew what to run this time.
Stop blaming the ham.
So we ended up
It's the James incident, not the ham incident.
So the first year in Barcelona, the NOC session had a slide about IPNet Service Gatekeeper. The second year in Barcelona, the NOC session had the same slide, and then on the next page, it had make notes from next year.
And this is where I came into the team because I'm the most organized on the team.
Remco was like, we need someone more organized.
OCD, yes.
Okay, let's stop it here. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Cisco Tech Stories podcast. You can subscribe to us on Cisco Podcast Network and SoundCloud or in your favorite podcasting app. You can also find us on X at Cisco Tech Story without S. Thanks again for listening and speak to you next month.
In the room where machines survive. Elena's got the map, she's leading the charge, deploying the future, making it large. With every click, every single bite, she's the captain of this wild night. The NOC is alive, feel the rhythm scream. Behind the curtain, they power the dream. They make it happen, the unsung fleet, the unsung heroes in the scorching heat. Andrew's got the scripts, the keys to the lock. Automating magic, turning time on the clock. Precision on fire, a dance in the code, building the pathways as the data explodes. And James pulls the wires with hands of steel, connectivity master, his moves unreal. Through the chaos, the signals glide. He's the bridge where empires ride. The NOC is alive, feel the rhythm scream. Behind the curtain, they power the dream. They make it happen, the unsung fleet, the unsung heroes in the scorching heat. Feel the rhythm scream. Behind the curtain, they power the dream. They make it happen, the unsung fleet, the unsung heroes in the scorching heat.